Done good, didn't you? Next week I'll have it unpacked.
Okay, we're gonna get some real meat and potatoes today, okay? Huh? Yes. Remember next week, no class, right?
What's next week?
We're gonna be out of town.
Oh,
Carl and I are going down to Kentucky
no,
to meet with Amanda, but 2 weeks from now we'll resume again, okay? All right. So, this week, I'm not going to do too much review again. We've done that quite a bit, and now we're really getting to the point of passive faith, and I've been mentioning it a lot, and I wrote through the whole thing. It's one of our principles here, and I took this from The Fire and the Staff by Clement Preuss, and he does the best job I've ever seen in comparing these two types of faith and the difference between the two. And like I mentioned in the past, we as Christians often confuse these two. Passive faith and active faith, we all have them, but we have to make a distinction between the two. And when we make a distinction to understand what passive faith really is, that's where we have our comfort. We don't have our comfort in active faith, although active faith is very important. And when we get done with this, I hope you understand that active faith is what brought you, other people's active faith is what has communicated to you the gospel. Okay? When you've seen the fruits of faith by other people, that's what's communicated to you the love of Christ. So it's as important as anything. I'm not saying one's more important than the other. Active faith does get produced. But passive faith is where we're driving this whole thing at, because of course the title of this whole Bible study is what? Everything is going to be okay, and we want to know how does God tell us that, as opposed to any human understanding or human ideas that everything's going to be okay because I'm the one who didn't lead in the body bag, right? Or I have the keys to successful living, and now I have the keys to successful living, and that's going to mean everything is going to be okay because I beat the odds, of a sickness or a death or a bad circumstance, which is far short of what God tells us in regards to why everything is going to be okay. And so we want to define the two. And Preuss, if you ever want a good book to read, Fire and the Staff by K. Preuss is an excellent book that goes into these kind of things in detail. And I'll read the text a little bit later. Romans 3, we're going to talk about passive faith, and Romans 3 is going to be the text I'm going to end up going to. And also with active faith, Galatians 5 and 6, we're going to read that too. All right? We left off last week with the first one, and we said the difference between passive faith and active faith is, first of all, how does it get informed? And we made the distinction between what? Gospel and law. Now, if you're from the Lutheran tradition and you studied this, you've been taught this when you went through catechism, but it's something we need to always go back over and over again. If you really want to learn about law and gospel, read Walther's Law and Gospel. It will take you to the extremes of what this is. It's a fantastic book. Every pastor in training has to study that really hard to understand the distinction between the two. And there is a distinction between the two, right? And so the law is what? It's holy. What is the law? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? We said this is just a little bit of review from last week. 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments tell you what? What you should and shouldn't do, right? The law of God is given to you because you need it. You need to be told by God what is good and what is bad, all right? So the law is righteous, and because we're in a sinful state, we have to be told the law. Had we not fallen into sin, you would not have had to been told the law because you would have lived the law. you wouldn't have sin. That's why when we fall into sin, then God has to give us the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai etched in stone so that we can study it. And if you recall the main point, there's 3 uses of the law. There's the curb, mirror, and the guide, right? And when we think of law by the curb, what do we think? First thing that comes up to my mind is police officer or judge. I think police officer. Why? Because when the police officer uses the law, he uses it on you as a curb. What is he doing? You break the law, what is he going to do? He's going to punish you. He's going to give you a ticket, or he's going to arrest you, depending, And if you're really breaking the law, he might pull his gun out on you and apprehend you, right? Difference between maybe jaywalking and murder, everything, but there's always a ramification. So he uses it as a curb, and so society benefits from the curb, because if I'm going to harm you, society should have a way in which to what? Curb me from harming you, and that's the law. That's the first use. Second use is where we really want to get into. The Christian, the second use of the law is what? In other words, the law is used and applied upon me how? By the what? Mirror. And what does a mirror do? Reflects me. So the law is this mirror, and it shows my true what? Sin and sinful self, right? And it causes what? Contrition. Contrition means I feel bad about it. Because the law has just showed me that what I'm doing is wrong. Okay? And you can find that all over in the Bible. In fact, the entire Bible is either law or gospel. You can divide the entire Bible by law and gospel. Okay? Any questions about that? All right. Gospel, on the other hand, is what?
Grace.
Grace.
Good news.
Good news. Good news is the actual interpretation. A revealed good news in the context of the scriptures is a revealed good news by God's word. And it's always, this is the nuts and bolts. It's what God has done for you. Not in any way what you have done for God. It's what God has done for you. And if you want to get more specific, which we must, it's what God has done for you in and through the person of Jesus Christ. So when I'm referring to the gospel, it has only to do with what God does. It's His action, not mine. I confuse it when I try to put my law or the law of God or what I must do for God. It's not. It's all one way, one direction, and that's why it's grace. It's undeserved favor. Okay? So, right away, with number one, when we say passive faith, is informed, is communicated to you only by the gospel. So right away we start to define what passive faith is. It has been informed to you only by the gospel, which means it's not by the what? Law. Active faith. Active faith is what I will do as a response, all right? It's the actions, it's the fruits, it's the text that comes to my mind first is Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches. You're the branches. If you're abiding in me, that's faith, that's actually passive faith. You will bear much fruit. Those fruits are works of righteousness that you do in response to the good news or the gospel. But being that it's active faith, it's informed to me by everybody, the law. And what we're dealing with now is the third use of the law in your catechism, which is the what? Guide or rule. Okay? All right? So let's just go to the active faith. In other words, you perform works of faith. Whether it's in your action or your doing, your stewardship, how you respond because you are a Christian, because you know the good news of Jesus, you do things differently than other people do. Okay? With a different motivation. Now, because I am simultaneously a sinner and a saint, and so are you. You're simultaneously sinner and saint, and that's always who you are until the day you die and you get rid of your flesh. Right? I have to be informed about what to do by the law. Notice it's not motivated by the law. Look at the very bottom. Both passive faith and active faith is motivated by the gospel. All right? But here I am as a Christian, and let's say, okay, I realize today that Jesus died for my sins, and I'm on my way to heaven. He's forgiven me all of my sins, all because of what he has done. And I have this desire to respond. Okay? You have this desire to respond, and you're motivated by the gospel. But when you respond, because I'm sinful and both simultaneously sinner and saint, I need the law to guide me in those directions. Okay? And that way, your active faith, what it is that you now do after belief, you do it, you're informed by the law. All right? I'm giving you a sneak peek to remember it's still motivated by all of your faith is motivated by the gospel. But you're a mixture. I mean, how many times will you, in your own mind, do something in response to the gospel and you do it, and you right away find your pride getting in the way while you're doing it, and you start patting yourself on the back. But you still also realize that you're motivated by the gospel. Doesn't that happen? Yes, because you're a mixture. You're simultaneously sinner and saint. So I still need, and this is where the guide comes in, I still need the law to guide me in those directions. Okay? Does that sound fair? You understanding that? Okay? Now we're going to unpack this. Remember, what's my goal is that you know everything is going to be okay. All right? Number 2, passive faith. All right? You already know I'm informed by the gospel, the good news, the grace of God. That faith that's passive is always, always, always directed towards God. My response is always towards God when it's passive. Now, why is that? Well, how does one receive the gospel, the good news? It's thanksgiving, isn't it? It's praise. The only way you can respond, if somebody is really nice to you, if somebody rescues you from, let's say you fell into a pit and there was a lion in there, and somebody came in and grabbed you out of there and pulled you out before you got eaten, your direction will be towards that individual and what he's done for you, right? That's your only response. Okay? So it's directed towards God alone. Your passive faith is always directed towards God, and this is already starting to give you a clue as to why it's in passive faith that you'll find everything is going to be okay. And you actually have to make the distinction between the two to realize everything is going to be okay. If you mix the active faith with the passive faith, you're going to start doubting everything is going to be okay. All right? Everybody with me? Okay. Active faith is directed towards the neighbor. Now, hopefully, if you're looking at those two things, in your mind, you're thinking about the 2 tables of the law, right? We talked about the 10 Commandments. What are the 2 tables of the law? First 3 commandments have to do with my relationship with God alone, right? No other gods, don't take his name in vain, and remember the Sabbath day worship. That has everything to do with my relationship with God. The last 7 commandments, it has everything to do with my neighbor, okay? So, the active faith, in other words, here the passive faith happens, and what happens? I'm informed by the gospel, just the good news, through Jesus Christ alone. And so my direction is thanksgiving to God, and that's it, thanksgiving to God. But now, when it moves to an active faith, it's towards you. Because a person's active faith, how do I now work? How does that faith now show itself? How does it come to fruition? It's how I deal with you. You need help. God doesn't. Right? So my active faith, I'm not helping God per se become better, right? Active faith always goes towards the other individual, and that's how the gospel is spread and has been spread throughout the world from the very beginning, right? Interestingly enough, God uses human beings to spread the gospel. He uses people who believe to spread the gospel. A person who doesn't believe doesn't spread the gospel. They'll spread their own thing, their own misunderstandings or false ideas of why everything is going to be okay. You, on the other hand, because you have a Christian faith, you're playing that out towards another person. And you'll find that that's exactly what Jesus does throughout his life. Is Jesus helping God per se directly? His Father? No, he's responding to the Father, but he's coming to heal you. Well, you're doing the same thing. So, it's directed towards the neighbor. These are my acts of what? This is bearing one another's burdens. These are the fruits. This is how God always calls us as a body of believers to treat one another. And you find that all over in the Scriptures. That's the importance of the church. This shows his wisdom as opposed to mine, because I wouldn't do it this way. I don't think this is economically superior to the idea that I think God should bypass you and go to me straight on. Don't you think that makes more sense? Why should he use you to get to me? Why doesn't God just give me the burning bush like Moses did and talk to me straight on without you? Not to offend you, but I think he would do a better job than you do. I would think. Right? But he doesn't do that. You ever wonder why? Because this is what the critic would say. I don't believe in God because I never what? See him. He never communicates to me. The reality is that the gospel is communicated through other human beings, whoever that may be. Your pastor, your teacher, your parent, your friend, whoever it is that conveys the gospel to you. Why does he do that?
Can we get it more often, different areas?
No, I think he can do it 100 times faster than us and more often than we get it through each other. Why do you think? It's to promote our fellowship with one another. It's to promote the second table of the law. It's because when God created us, when he created us in the beginning, he created Adam, and Adam was not what? It was not right for Adam to be alone. I must build my church. There must be relationship between human beings. That's as important to God as our relationship with God. His purpose was that there be a church so that we have relationship with each other, and that relationship that we have right now is forever. We're going through this pilgrimage together, and we're each going to die at a different time, but we're all going to go, and this fellowship that we have now, which has within it the stain of sin, will continue on forever. And so God uses the fellowship in order to bring Christ to each other. He promotes the fellowship between you and me. That's why. Is that making sense? From my perspective, it's not economical. I would suggest to you that if God just hit everybody square on by himself with some kind of real extraordinary miracle, there would be a whole lot more converts than there are using the church and it's all of its pathetic problems, right? That shows how much wiser God is than I am, all right? And there is that one, remember Lazarus, the story of Lazarus, where Lazarus goes into heaven, and the rich guy goes into hell. And remember at the end, the guy says, hey, go warn my brothers. And Abraham says, they have Moses and the prophets, they have the word of God. And the guy goes, no. You got to send somebody from the dead, right? And remember the response is, if they don't believe Moses and the prophets, they're not going to believe someone who's come back from the dead. Isn't that an interesting point? Okay? Because if you really want to believe whether somebody came back from the dead or not, you can research it, look at it in Scripture, and if you have that kind of an attitude, you'll find that it's pretty clear that the Gospel says somebody has been risen from the dead. It's Jesus, but nobody's going. If you don't want to believe God, you're not going to, even if that miracle exists. That's what he's saying. So already the Scriptures has proven my economy wrong, even though from my perspective, if I'm a marketing guy in a company, if I can get God to get you to buy my product on an individual basis, I would definitely have him bypass the salesman. But it doesn't work that way. Okay? All right? But then, this also tells you how important your act of faith is, right? I would suggest every one of us sitting here can say, thank God for the act of faith of all those people who have influenced me in my Christianity, right? And you can name them. Go all the way back to when you were a little kid. Maybe it's your parents, maybe it was grandma, maybe it was so. You can write all the people who were influenced, the reason why you sit here with faith in Jesus. And every one of those people, you can find the act of faith. Their act of faith is the reason why you sit in that faith that is passive. Question?
Am I going to know all those people who have been instrumental in bringing me to the Lord when I'm in heaven? And if so, wouldn't that mean that we would then have a past in heaven as opposed to just a future? I mean,
Yeah.
just a present?
Yeah. I think you're going to know everybody even more so than you know them here. Yeah. I believe that.
But isn't that saying we have a past then?
Mm-hmm. Are you going back to the eternal moment?
I'm thinking of the past, present, and future that we were talking about.
Yeah. We do have a past. Yeah.
In heaven.
Well, I don't want to get into that because that's a theory of mine and I don't want to even get into. Let me just put it this way. I know you, and to the extent I know you and our past together, we're going to bring that into heaven and it's only going to be better. That's why what I would convey. Okay. Yes?
I think, like, one of the ways that I think of the absence of time is that, well, there'll be an absence of the deterioration that comes with time. You know, I mean, that's kind of the way I think of it that way because it's the elimination of the chaos, you know.
Right.
As time passes, things want to go back to chaos where God made order, you know. That's the way I kind of think of it.
Mm-hmm.
As,
Yeah, the only thing is, and that goes back to Gary, who's not here, because I could tell Gary in the corner there was struggling with it. He's not here, I know Gary, he's struggling. But remember that time begins not at the fall and deterioration. Time began at the creation. And so I think there's more to it, but I agree with it. I'm sure that's true.
I hadn't thought of it.
Right, but the time, the whole time thing, that's why, and if you get confused about the time thing, think, what's my point about that whole thing is transcendence, right? God's coming from eternity into your present time where you exist, and therefore there's a lot you don't understand in regards to this comfort that you have. Okay, good point. All right, so let's keep going now. Number 3. Passive faith, this is really important. This has everything to do with our humility. Passive faith, now just read it all down the line, which has been informed by the gospel, so the only thing I have going for me is the works of Christ alone, It's directed towards God. I'm praising Him in thanksgiving because it's only Christ alone, and all I can do is give Him thanks. All right? And listen, it makes me identical to you. Totally identical to you. Regardless of physical ability, intellect, looks, wisdom, whatever it may be in our comparisons, age, passive faith, knowing that Christ has done it all for me, immediately pushes and promotes a humility between us. In other words, without Christ, finish the sentence. You and I are what? The same lost human being. Nobody has it up on another person when salvation comes to them. Nobody deserves salvation more than another person. Nobody doesn't deserve salvation more than another person. And this is the humility that gets promoted, is that it makes me identical to you, even though, I can appreciate the abilities you have that I don't, but those abilities that you have that I don't, it doesn't matter. That make sense? All right? Now, go to the other side, active faith. All right? Now, it's very interesting when you go into the scriptures, Jesus does make, and the scriptures do make, a point about works and the degree of works in a human being. In fact, in the end, it talks about that your reward in heaven will be great. Okay? So, when you think about active faith, it does make me different from others. First of all, it makes me different from who? Those who don't have any faith at all. All right? At the same time, I know when I witness somebody do something, or I learn from somebody, or I see a mature Christian or what have you, and I see the things that they do, and I can see their great active faith in what they do. I can see it. And I can compare it to me and say, wow, that person has done so much, it can be measured. And so it does make one different from another. Okay? That make sense? It doesn't make you less saved or more saved. It doesn't make you more loved or less loved by God, right? But I'm certainly not going to compare myself to the Apostle Paul in regards to active faith in what he accomplished by the grace of God. Okay? Make sense? And you notice what's very interesting is it's informed by the law, and because it's informed by the law, you can actually measure it. You can measure the degrees of righteousness within there. Okay? Because it's active faith. Active faith is the works. Hopefully you're understanding. Active faith is the response. It's your stewardship. It's what you do in response. So number 4, this is so important. This hits one of my 2 main points here, and that is always have an eternal perspective. What's the other? And when you do with eternal perspective, I want you to have this memorized.
Theology of the cross.
Absolutely. And theology of the cross, and you carry your cross and follow. 2 main things. Eternal perspective, and I carry my cross and follow Jesus because he's made it safe, right? So from a passive faith, and I should say passive, it's very interesting. If you study the Greek language, or any language for that matter, if a word is in the passive, if you identify a Greek word and the verb is in a passive tense, you always realize that the verb is directed towards God. God is the actor in a passive tense. You learn that. Okay? So the actor is always God on this end of it. The actions, the works is always God on this end of it. The works on this end is what? You, in its response. All right? makes me identical as I have heaven in view. I have heaven in view. And this, I'm going to make this distinction, and this is where I think our minds will get blown and stretched. But this is very important to understand. It's here. I have heaven in view, and with that, I would say I have God's will in view, His eternal purpose in view, knowing that, and this, it's going to be okay because God's heaven and God's will and purpose will be done, and that's why we pray it in the Lord's Prayer. But I have heaven in view. I have eternity in view when I'm thinking about my passive faith. That which I can't control, because you can't control heaven and you can't control getting there, can you? You see the character of passive faith developing here? Okay? In a bit of a contrast, your act of faith, your works of righteousness, I have this world in view. Why? Well, and now I begin to understand why I'm even here in the first place, and what gives me my value as a human being, what gives me my purpose as a human being. That whatever my vocation, whatever my position in a family or in whatever context, I have this world in view because I am in time and space. I'm still living on this side of heaven. What do I get to do as a Christian? What's my main thing to do as a Christian? Those people who I deal with, be Christ-like towards them with active faith. And therefore, I only have you in view. I don't have to manipulate God in any way, do I? But when I do, and here's where it gets, we have to really make this distinction, because this is where I worry. This is where I'm worried about my friend or my niece or that person that is in a terrible situation or is dealing with their faith, or maybe is, those people who I love that I don't think are living their lives right, and I worry whether they have salvation at all. And so when I meet them, I have to pray about it and should pray about it, and I wonder how I'm going to deal with this individual. How am I going to approach this individual? How can I help this other person with whatever they're going through? That's what being a Christian is, and that should be the purpose of our life. So I have the world in view because this is where it's happening. In time and space is where God is transcending through His Word, through you, to other people, and this is where people, their determination of heaven and hell is existing here, right? This is where it happens. So I have the world in view when it comes to active faith, and that goes along with everything else too. So it's informed by the law, directed towards you. There's a difference between me and you, and I may identify a difference between you and me. And what if I say, oh, I see that this person has a lack of faith. Now, interesting, we just had the text of Timothy in church this last Sunday. And here's just one example of it that comes